Rain hammered against the towering glass windows of Vale Corporation, like thousands of desperate fingertips trying to get inside. The city beyond the building blurred into streaks of gold and gray, swallowed by the storm and the darkness of another endless night. Inside the 32nd floor office, Elena Carter rubbed her tired eyes and stared at the glowing spreadsheet on her computer screen. Numbers swam before her vision. Her shoulders ached. Her fingers trembled from exhaustion. It was nearly 10:30 p.m. again. Most employees had left hours ago. The polished marble hallways were silent now, except for the distant hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional echo of thunder rolling through the sky. Cleaning crews moved like ghosts through the building, barely noticing her as they passed. Nobody ever noticed her. Not the executives rushing past with expensive watches and perfect smiles. Not the co-workers who dumped unfinished tasks onto her desk before disappearing home to warm dinners and families. And certainly not Daniel Mercer, the regional operations manager who seemed to take personal pleasure in humiliating her. Elena, his sharp voice had snapped earlier that evening across the office floor. Loud enough for everyone to hear? If you moved any slower, we'd still be in last quarter. A few people laughed quietly. She had lowered her eyes and whispered an apology, even though the mistake hadn't been hers. It never mattered. By now, Elena had learned that survival meant staying quiet. Her phone buzzed softly beside the keyboard. A hospital payment reminder flashed across the screen, followed by another overdue electricity notice. She swallowed hard and locked the phone without opening either message. The tiny apartment she rented on the edge of the city was barely affordable anymore. Since her mother's death 8 months ago, bills had piled like bricks around her chest, crushing her little by little. Years of medical treatments, borrowed money, and sleepless nights had drained everything she had. Everything except the habit. Slowly, Elena opened a hidden folder buried deep inside her email drafts. Untitled messages filled the screen. Hundreds of them. Some were angry, some heartbreakingly sad. Others were simply random thoughts typed during lonely nights when silence became unbearable. She never sent them to anyone. Writing was the only thing that made her feel less invisible. When words filled the screen, it felt like she still existed somewhere. Outside, lightning flashed across the city skyline. Elena exhaled shakily and opened a blank email. To Maya Reynolds, her best friend from college. The only person who still checked on her sometimes. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard before finally beginning to move. I don't know how much longer I can pretend I'm okay. The words poured out faster now. I feel invisible here. Every day feels the same. Wake up. Work until I can barely breathe. Come home to an empty apartment, repeat. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept typing. I used to think life would become something beautiful someday. Isn't that pathetic? I wanted to write books once. I wanted people to feel something when they read my words. Now I spend my nights fixing spreadsheets for people who don't even know my last name. Thunder shook the windows. Elena wiped her face roughly. I'm tired, Maya, so tired. Sometimes I think the world wouldn't even notice if I disappeared tomorrow. The office felt colder after that sentence. For a moment, she simply stared at it, her chest tightening with emotions she had spent years swallowing. Then came the final line. I just wish someone would finally see me. A tear slid down her cheek and landed on the keyboard. Elena inhaled slowly, exhausted beyond thought. She reached for her coffee cup, forgetting it was empty, then shook her head with a weak laugh at herself. Her eyes burned. Without fully looking at the screen, she moved the cursor and clicked send. The email vanished. For 2 seconds, nothing happened. Then her sleepy brain finally noticed the name at the top of the screen. Not Maya Reynolds. Adrian Vale. Her blood turned to ice. The billionaire founder of Vale Corporation, the most powerful man in the entire company. No, 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 no. Her chair screeched backward violently as panic exploded through her body. Elena lunged for the keyboard, frantically opening sent mail. Her breathing became uneven and sharp. The message sat there in plain sight. Delivered. To Adrian Vale. Every humiliating word. Every desperate confession. Every tear-soaked sentence. Sent directly to the billionaire owner whose name terrified half the company. Oh my God. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the mouse. Delete it. Unsending wasn't possible. She slammed the laptop shut as if that could somehow erase reality. Her career was over. Daniel would fire her instantly. Worse, Adrian Vale himself might think she was unstable, manipulative, attention-seeking. People disappeared from this company for far less. Elena pressed both trembling hands against her mouth, trying to stop herself from crying harder. The office suddenly felt suffocating. She grabbed her coat, hurried through the empty hallways, and nearly ran into the elevator. Her reflection in the mirrored walls looked pale and broken under the fluorescent lights. By the time she reached her apartment nearly an hour later, rain had soaked through her clothes completely. The tiny room greeted her with darkness and silence. She dropped her bag near the door and slid down against the wall, burying her face in her knees. "What have I done?" she whispered shakily. Outside, the storm continued raging across the city. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Her anxiety refused to let her sleep. Every sound from the hallway made her heart jump. Every vibration from her phone made her stomach twist violently. 11:58 p.m. Elena stared blankly at the ceiling from her worn-out couch, imagining tomorrow's humiliation waiting for her. Then suddenly, 3 slow knocks echoed through her apartment. Knock, knock, knock. Elena froze. At midnight? Nobody ever came here. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she slowly stood and walked toward the door. And when she looked through the peephole, her entire world stopped breathing. Elena's breath caught so violently in her throat that for a second, she thought she might faint right there beside the door. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, rainwater still dripping from the shoulders of a charcoal black coat, was Adrian Vale. The Adrian Vale. Even through the distorted peephole, there was no mistaking him. The sharp jawline. The streak of silver near his temple that business magazines called distinguished. The calm, unreadable expression that had become legendary across financial news channels. One of the richest men in the country was standing outside her apartment at midnight. Her knees nearly gave out beneath her. "No," she whispered under her breath. "This can't be real." Another soft knock echoed through the apartment, not impatient, not angry, almost careful. Elena stared at the lock, panic racing through every nerve in her body. Maybe if she stayed silent, he would leave. Maybe this was some horrible hallucination caused by stress and exhaustion, but deep down, she already knew neither was true. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she unlocked the door. The hallway's pale yellow light spilled across Adrian's face. Up close, he looked different from the polished images online. Less untouchable. More human. Rain clung to the dark strands of his hair, and exhaustion shadowed his eyes as though sleep had abandoned him long ago. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Elena immediately lowered her gaze. "Mr. Vale, I'm so sorry about the email. I swear it was an accident. I didn't mean to send it to you. I would never—" "I know." His voice was low and calm. That somehow made it worse. Elena's throat tightened painfully. "Please believe me. I wasn't trying to get attention or sympathy or anything like that. I was just tired and I said I know." The rain thundered against the apartment building behind him. Somewhere downstairs, a car alarm echoed briefly before fading into the storm. Adrian studied her quietly. Not like a billionaire, examining an employee. Like someone trying to understand a puzzle. Only. Then did Elena suddenly become aware of how awful she looked. Her oversized sweater was wrinkled. Her eyes were swollen from crying. A stack of unpaid bills sat openly on the tiny kitchen counter behind her. The apartment itself was barely larger than Adrian's office waiting room. Humiliation burned through her chest. "I'll resign tomorrow," she blurted quickly. "You won't have to deal with this again." Something flickered in Adrian's expression. Confusion, maybe. "Why would you resign?" Elena stared at him, stunned. "Because I sent you that. You sent me the truth." The words hit her harder than anger would have. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Adrian's eyes drifted past her shoulder, quietly taking in the apartment. The peeling paint near the ceiling, the old couch with frayed corners, the pharmacy bags beside the sink, a framed photograph sitting alone on a shelf, a woman smiling warmly beside a younger Elena. His gaze lingered there. "Your mother?" he asked softly. Elena swallowed. "She passed away last year." A silence settled between them. Not awkward. Heavy. Adrian looked back at her, and for the first time she noticed something unexpected in his eyes. Loneliness. Not the dramatic kind people performed for sympathy. This looked older, deeper, like a wound that had lived inside him for years. "You said in your email that nobody notices you," he said quietly. Elena felt her cheeks burn instantly. Hearing her own words spoken aloud made her want to disappear. "I shouldn't have written that." "But you did." The storm outside seemed to grow. Outer, Adrian glanced once more around the apartment before speaking again. "You work later than almost everyone in that building." Elena blinked in surprise. "I've seen you there," he continued. "Most nights. You noticed me?" A strange sadness crossed his face then. "Yes." Her chest tightened unexpectedly. Nobody had said that to her in a very long time. Adrian exhaled slowly and loosened the rain-soaked gloves in his hands. "I almost didn't come." Elena frowned slightly. "When I read your email," he said, "I thought it was another employee trying to manipulate me." "It happens more often than you'd think." Pain flashed across Elena's face. "I swear that wasn't—" "I know." His voice softened slightly. "Because nobody trying to manipulate someone writes like that." The hallway fell silent again. Elena could barely process what was happening. None of this felt real. Billionaires didn't show up at tiny apartments after midnight to discuss accidental emails. Yet here he was. And somehow, despite her fear, she realized something even stranger. He looked just as emotionally. Exhausted as she felt, Adrian's gaze drifted briefly toward the rain-covered window at the end of the hallway. "You wrote something else?" he said after a moment. Elena's stomach dropped. "Oh God, you said you used to dream about becoming a writer." She closed her eyes briefly in embarrassment. "That was a long time ago. Why did you stop?" A bitter laugh escaped her before she could stop it. "Life." Adrian looked at her carefully, almost like he recognized the answer too well. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, "Do you still write?" Elena hesitated. "Only things nobody reads." Something about that answer seemed to affect him deeply. His jaw tightened slightly, and for the first time his calm expression cracked, just enough for grief to show beneath it. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. Elena looked up. "Someone I lost a very long time ago." The sincerity in his voice stunned her. Before she could respond, Adrian reached into the inside pocket of his coat and pulled out a small black business card. He handed it to tomorrow, 8 a.m. An address was written neatly on the back in silver ink. Elena frowned in confusion. "What is this?" Adrian met her eyes. "A chance," he said simply. "For what?" A faint, unreadable expression touched his face. "To be seen." And with that, Adrian Vale turned and walked down the dim apartment hallway, disappearing into the storm that had brought him there. Elena stood frozen in the doorway long after he was gone, the card trembling slightly in her fingers. Then her eyes dropped to the silver address again, and suddenly, for reasons she could not explain, she realized her life had just changed forever. Elena barely slept. The business card remained on the table beside her couch all night, as though simply touching it might somehow confirm this had actually happened. Several times she convinced herself the entire encounter had been a stress-induced dream. But every time she looked at the elegant silver lettering on the card, reality came crashing back. Adrian Vale had come to her apartment, not an assistant, not security, him. By 6 in the morning, The storm had faded into a gray, fog-covered dawn. Elena stood in front of the tiny bathroom mirror, trying to make herself look presentable, while exhaustion pulled heavily beneath her eyes. "You are not going," she muttered to herself. Then 5 minutes later, she grabbed the card and left anyway. The address led far beyond the city center, away from crowded streets and towering office buildings. Elena sat silently in the taxi, watching the skyline slowly disappear behind iron gates, enormous estates, and tree-lined roads she had only ever seen in magazines. Finally, the car stopped before a massive black gate, guarded by stone pillars. Vale Estate, her. Pulse quickened instantly. The gates opened without a word from the driver. As the car rolled slowly up the winding driveway, Elena stared speechlessly through the window. The estate looked less like a home and more like something from another world. Tall glass walls reflected the pale morning light. Fountains shimmered beneath enormous oak trees. Security moved discreetly through the grounds. Everything about it screamed power. And somehow, despite all its beauty, it felt cold. The front doors opened before she even reached them. A sharply dressed older woman greeted her with a polite nod. "Miss Carter," Elena blinked. "You know who I am? We were informed to expect you." That sentence alone nearly made her turn around. The woman introduced herself as Margaret, Adrian's head house manager, and guided Elena through the estate's enormous marble corridors. Every footstep echoed softly around priceless paintings and towering windows. Yet despite the luxury, something felt strangely empty. No laughter, no warmth, no signs that anyone truly lived there. Margaret finally stopped. Before a pair of dark wooden doors, "Mr. Vale is waiting." Inside, Elena's throat tightened. She stepped into the room carefully. It was a private library unlike anything she had ever seen. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves climbed endlessly toward a painted ceiling. Rain-colored light filtered through enormous windows overlooking the estate gardens. And standing near the fireplace, dressed in a black suit with one hand resting inside his pocket, was Adrian Vale. He looked up as she entered. For a brief moment, something unreadable softened in his expression. "You came?" Elena shifted nervously. "I almost didn't. That would have disappointed me." The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than arrogance would have. Adrian motioned toward a chair near the fireplace. "Sit!" Elena obeyed carefully, clutching her bag tightly in her lap. Adrian remained standing for a moment, studying the flames in silence before finally speaking. "I read your personnel file this morning." Elena stiffened immediately. "You've worked at Vale Corporation for 4 years," he continued. "No complaints. No disciplinary records. No absences despite—" His eyes lifted toward her gently. "Everything you were dealing with." Elena looked down quickly. "I tried my best. I know. Again." Those words, simple, quiet, dangerously sincere. Adrian moved toward the large desk near the windows and picked up several old papers bound carefully with string. "Asked you here because I need help with something." Elena frowned slightly. "Sir, if this is about the email, I really—" "It's not." He placed the stack before her. Letters, dozens of them, all handwritten, some yellowed with age. Elena looked at him in confusion. "My staff organizes my business affairs efficiently," Adrian said. "But there are personal archives I've never allowed anyone to touch." "Why me?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Adrian's gaze lingered on her. "Quietly. Because you understand what it means to carry pain." Silently. The room fell still. Elena didn't know how to answer that. Adrian sat across from her now. Though even seated, he carried the kind of presence that filled every corner of the room. "There was a time," he said slowly, "when someone important to me believed writing could save people." Elena's heartbeat slowed strangely. "She used to leave letters everywhere," he continued, almost lost in memory. "Inside books, coat pockets, drawers." A faint sadness touched his mouth. She said words mattered because they stayed behind after people disappeared. Something painful flickered across his face before vanishing again. Elena looked down at the letters carefully. Who was she? Adrian's expression closed immediately. That story isn't important right now, but the grief in his eyes said otherwise. Before Elena could ask another question, the library doors suddenly opened. A tall man entered sharply without knocking. Everything about him felt cold. Perfect suit. Controlled posture. Calculating eyes. The moment he saw Elena sitting across from Adrian, surprise flashed across his face before hardening into disapproval. Adrian, he said tightly, the board meeting starts in 40 minutes. Adrian barely looked at him. Then I suggest they wait. The man's eyes shifted toward Elena again, and instantly she felt like she was being examined under a microscope. This is the assistant? He asked. Elena Carter, Adrian corrected calmly. The man gave a thin smile that never reached his eyes. Victor Hale, the name was familiar. Elena recognized it immediately from company reports. Adrian's longtime business partner, but something about him made her uneasy at once. Victor's gaze lingered on the letters sitting before her, then on Adrian, then back to Elena. And suddenly, the atmosphere inside the room changed. Sharp, tense, dangerous. You're trusting a stranger with those files? Victor asked carefully. Adrian's voice cooled several degrees. That won't be a problem. Victor smiled again, though this one felt even colder than before. No, he said softly. I suppose not. But Elena noticed the look in his eyes before he turned away. It wasn't curiosity, it was fear. The moment Victor Hale left the library, the silence he left behind felt heavier than the storm from the night before. Elena sat motionless in the chair, her fingers resting lightly against the stack of letters while Adrian stared toward the closed doors with an expression she could not fully read. You don't trust him, she said carefully before she could stop herself. A faint smile touched Adrian's face, though there was no warmth in it. I trust very few people. The honesty of the answer lingered in the room. Elena lowered her eyes to the letters again. Some envelopes were worn at the edges, as though they had been opened and reread countless times. Others remained perfectly sealed. All of them carried the same elegant handwriting. Who wrote these? She asked softly. For a moment, Adrian said nothing. Then he walked slowly toward the massive windows overlooking the gardens below. Morning fog drifted across the estate grounds like pale smoke, wrapping everything in silence. Someone who changed my life, he said quietly. There it was again. That sadness. Not temporary grief, but something ancient. Something that had rooted itself deep inside him years ago and never left. Elena studied him carefully now. The world saw Adrian Vale as untouchable, a billionaire who owned skyscrapers, companies, headlines. But standing here, with exhaustion hiding beneath his calm exterior, he looked less like a powerful man and more like someone carrying a wound too heavy to set down. You loved her, Elena said gently. Adrian's shoulders stiffened slightly. Yes, just one word. But it carried decades inside it. Before the silence could deepen further, Margaret returned with coffee and quietly placed a tray beside them. Elena thanked her softly, earning a surprised glance from the older woman, as though kindness was uncommon within these walls. Once they were alone again, Adrian finally turned back toward her. I'm asking you to organize these archives, he explained. Letters, journals, documents. Nothing leaves this room. Elena blinked. You trust me with something this personal after one accidental email? A shadow of amusement crossed his expression. You'd be surprised how honest people become when they think nobody important is listening. Heat crept into Elena's cheeks instantly. Adrian noticed. But instead of embarrassing her further, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. You said something last night, he continued. I wish someone would finally see me. Elena looked down quickly. I know what that feels like. The room fell silent again. Not uncomfortable, just painfully real. Adrian moved toward one of the bookshelves and pressed something hidden along the wooden paneling. A quiet click echoed through the library. Then part of the shelf slowly opened. Elena's breath caught. Behind it was another room, Smaller, darker, private. She rose slowly from her chair as Adrian stepped aside, allowing her to enter first. The air inside smelled faintly of old paper and cedarwood. Shelves lined every wall, filled with neatly preserved boxes, journals, photographs, and hundreds of handwritten letters. But it was the photographs that pulled Elena's attention immediately. A young Adrian stood smiling beside a woman with dark hair and warm eyes. Another showed them sitting together on the hood of an old car, laughing at something outside the frame. In every picture, Adrian looked lighter somehow, younger, happy in a way she could not imagine the present version of him ever being. And the woman beside him? Elena froze. Her heartbeat slowed unnaturally. No, that couldn't be possible. She stepped closer to one photograph sitting near the desk. The woman's smile, her eyes, the shape of her face. It was impossible, because she looked almost exactly like Elena's mother. A chill ran through her body. Adrian noticed the sudden color drain from her face instantly. What is it? Elena stared at the photograph, unable to breathe properly. That woman? She whispered. Adrian's expression sharpened immediately. You know her? No, Elena said too quickly. I don't know. She just... Her throat tightened painfully. It felt ridiculous. Plenty of people resembled one another. The world was full of coincidences, wasn't it? Still, she couldn't stop staring. The resemblance was terrifying. Adrian walked closer now, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her reaction. You've seen someone like her before. It wasn't a question. Elena swallowed hard. She looks like my mother. The words seemed to hit Adrian harder than expected. For the first time since she'd met him, his composure visibly cracked. What was your mother's name? He asked quietly. Elise Carter. Something unreadable flickered behind his eyes before vanishing. How long ago did she pass away? 8 months. Adrian looked away immediately, jaw tightening subtly as though fighting some internal reaction. Elena suddenly became aware of how fast her own heart was beating. Why did this feel wrong? Or worse, connected? Trying to steady herself, she turned her attention toward the desk inside the hidden room. More letters were stacked there, along with a leather journal left partially open. One loose paper rested beneath it. Curiosity pulled at her before she could stop herself. She glanced down. The handwriting matched the letters perfectly, and written near the bottom of the page were words that made her blood run cold. If anything happens to me, promise me you'll never stop looking for her. Elena's pulse pounded violently. For her? She whispered. Adrian stepped forward quickly and closed the journal. Too quickly. The movement confirmed more than the words themselves. There are things in this room, he said carefully, that belong to the past. But you never let go of that past, Elena replied before thinking. Their eyes met, and for a second, something dangerous passed silently between them. Not romance, recognition, as though two separate pieces of a story were slowly moving toward each other. Then suddenly, a loud crack of thunder shook the windows. The lights flickered once, and in that brief flash of white light, Elena noticed something else sitting half-hidden beneath a pile of photographs. An old silver necklace, a tiny crescent moon pendant hanging from it. Her breath stopped completely, because her mother had owned the exact same necklace, every day of her life. Elena couldn't take her eyes off the necklace. The tiny silver crescent moon rested against the dark wooden desk, catching faint light from the storm beyond the windows. Her chest tightened so painfully she had to force herself to breathe. No, it had to be coincidence. It had to. Yet memories rose uncontrollably inside her mind. Her mother standing at the kitchen stove, wearing that necklace over a faded sweater, her fingers absent-mindedly touching the pendant whenever she became nervous. The day Elena had asked where it came from, only for her mother to quickly change the subject. Elena? Adrian's voice sounded distant. She blinked rapidly and realized she had gone completely pale. That necklace, she whispered. Where did you get it? Adrian's expression changed instantly. Slowly, carefully, he picked up the pendant. It belonged to her. His thumb brushed lightly across the silver moon. Not casually, reverently, like touching a ghost. Elena's pulse thundered louder in her ears. The woman in the photographs? Yes, she swallowed hard. What was her name? Silence filled the hidden room, then Adrian finally answered. Isabel. The name hit Elena strangely. Not familiar exactly, but unsettling, like hearing an echo from somewhere buried deep in childhood. Adrian watched her closely now, as though trying to solve something impossible inside his own mind. She disappeared 26 years ago, he said quietly. Elena frowned slightly. Disappeared? Adrian nodded once, his gaze drifting toward the photographs lining the shelves. We were young, he continued slowly. Before the companies. Before the money. Before any of this. His eyes darkened faintly. She was the only person who ever cared whether I succeeded or failed. The vulnerability in his voice stunned Elena. She believed in me when I had nothing, he said. And then one day, she vanished. Rain tapped softly against the hidden room windows. Elena barely moved. Something inside her felt dangerously unstable now. What happened to her? She asked. No one knows. The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. Adrian looked down at the necklace again. She left without warning. No goodbye. No explanation. A faint bitterness crept beneath his calm tone. I spent years searching for her. And you never found anything? His jaw tightened. Only rumors. The room grew colder somehow. Elena glanced again at the photographs. The resemblance between Isabel and her mother was becoming impossible to ignore now. Even their smiles felt identical. Her stomach twisted. Can I ask you something? She said carefully. Adrian looked at her. How old was Isabel when she disappeared? 24. Elena's breath caught quietly. Her mother would have been around that same age. No, this was insane. Her mother's name was Elise Carter. She had raised Elena alone in a tiny apartment her entire life. She worked 2 jobs, avoided discussing the past, and never once mentioned billionaires or disappearances or hidden rooms filled with letters. So why did Elena suddenly feel like the ground beneath her entire existence was cracking apart? Before she could speak again, footsteps echoed outside the hidden room. Heavy, fast. A moment later, Victor Hale appeared at the doorway. His sharp eyes immediately moved from Adrian to Elena, to the necklace in Adrian's hand. And for the briefest second, fear crossed his face again. Not discomfort, not irritation. Fear. There you are, Victor said smoothly, though his voice carried tension beneath it. The board is demanding answers. Adrian's expression cooled immediately. Then answer them. Victor ignored the remark entirely. His attention remained fixed on Elena now. You seem very interested in old family history. Miss Carter. The way he said it sent unease crawling through her chest. I was just organizing the archives, Elena answered carefully. Victor stepped farther into the room, his polished shoes echoing softly against the wooden floor. You know, he said lightly, Adrian has always had difficulty letting go of the past. Adrian's eyes hardened. That's enough, but Victor continued calmly. It's tragic, really. 26 years searching for someone who clearly never intended to come back. Something dangerous flickered across Adrian's face. Elena felt the sudden tension instantly. Victor noticed it too and smiled, not kindly, cruelly. Then his gaze shifted, toward the photographs again. You should be careful, he said softly to Elena. Sometimes old stories pull innocent people into very ugly truths. The warning felt deliberate. Before Elena could respond, Victor turned toward Adrian once more. There's also another issue, he said. Adrian looked irritated already. What now? Victor hesitated. A reporter contacted legal this morning. The room went still. He claims someone inside the company has been reviewing sealed historical files connected to the Mercer investigation. Adrian's expression darkened instantly. Elena has nothing to do with that. Victor lifted an eyebrow slightly. Interesting. I didn't mention her. Elena's stomach tightened. What investigation? But Adrian's silence spoke louder than words. Victor slipped both hands calmly into his pockets. The past is buried for a reason. Adrian. Something about the sentence chilled Elena completely. Then Victor looked directly at her one last time. If I were you, he said quietly, I'd stop asking questions about Isabel. And with that, he walked away. The hidden room suddenly felt suffocating. Elena turned slowly toward Adrian. What is the Mercer investigation? Adrian didn't answer immediately, which frightened her more than any answer could have. Finally, he spoke. Years ago, before Vale Corporation became what it is now, there were accusations against several executives. What kind of accusations? His silence lingered too long. Then, corruption, fraud, disappearances? Elena stared at him. Disappearances? Adrian's eyes met hers heavily. People who knew too much. A cold wave passed through her body. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky again, and suddenly, for the first time since arriving at the estate, Elena became afraid of the truth she was getting closer to. That night, Elena couldn't stop thinking about her mother. Every memory suddenly felt suspicious now. Every unanswered question. Every moment Elise Carter had avoided speaking about the past. It replayed endlessly in Elena's mind like fragments of a puzzle she had never realized existed. She barely touched the dinner Margaret had prepared for her in the estate guest suite. The room itself was larger than her entire apartment, yet it felt strangely suffocating. By midnight, sleep was impossible, Rain whispered softly, against the windows as Elena sat, cross-legged on the bed with an old cardboard box she had requested delivered from her apartment earlier that evening, her mother's belongings. Most of it was ordinary, worn sweaters, old receipts, medicine prescriptions, a few faded photographs from Elena's childhood. But now Elena searched, differently, carefully, desperately, as though the truth might be hidden between them folds of ordinary things, hours. As something, finally, exhausted and frustrated, she leaned back against the headboard and closed her eyes. Then suddenly, a memory surfaced, a small wooden jewelry box. Elena's eyes snapped open. She remembered it clearly now. Her mother had kept it hidden in the back of her closet for years and never allowed Elena to touch it. After the funeral, Elena had shoved it into storage without opening it. Her pulse quickened. She dropped to the floor, beside the cardboard box, and dug frantically through its contents until finally her fingers touched polished wood, the jewelry box. Her hands trembled as she lifted it carefully onto the bed. For several seconds, she simply stared at it, then slowly opened the lid. Inside lay only a few simple items: an old ring, a dried white flower pressed between tissues, and beneath them a sealed envelope. Elena froze. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting across the front remained painfully elegant for Adrian. Her heartbeat slammed violently against her ribs. No, the room suddenly felt too small. She stared at the envelope in disbelief, fingers trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Her mother had written to Adrian Vale, not just known him. Written to him personally. Every instinct told Elena not to open it. But another part of her, the frightened child who had spent her entire life wondering why her mother always looked sad when she thought nobody was watching, needed the truth. Slowly, she broke the seal. Inside was a single handwritten letter. And the moment Elena began reading, her world shattered. Adrian, if you are reading this, then it means I failed to keep my promise. First, you must know this. I never stopped loving you. Elena's vision blurred instantly. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the distant hills. I disappeared because I had no choice. They found out what I discovered about the company. About Victor. About the money being moved through offshore accounts. About the people being threatened into silence. My God. Elena pressed a shaking hand against her mouth. Victor. Her eyes raced across the page. They told me if I stayed, you would die. So I ran. I changed my name. I disappeared before they could find me again. Tears spilled down Elena's face now. Then came the line that stopped her breathing completely. I wanted to tell you about our daughter. The room tilted violently. No. No. Elena reread the sentence 3 times, unable to process it. Our daughter. Her chest tightened so painfully she thought she might collapse. I named her Elena. The letter slipped from her trembling fingers onto the bed. A sharp ringing filled her ears. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be. Adrian Vale was her father. For several seconds, Elena sat frozen in complete silence, staring at nothing. Then suddenly, the years of confusion came crashing into place all at once. Why her mother never spoke about Elena's father. Why she changed the subject whenever Elena asked. Why she looked terrified any time powerful people were mentioned on the news. Why she kept the crescent moon necklace hidden after all those years. Because she had been running. Her entire life. A knock startled Elena so badly she gasped aloud. She quickly wiped her tears, panic surging through her chest. Miss Carter? Margaret's voice. Elena? Mr. Vale is asking for you. Her pulse exploded. She looked down at the letter again. At the words that had changed everything. Then back toward the door. Part of her wanted to run. Another part needed answers. 5 minutes later, Elena stood outside Adrian's private study, her breathing shallow and uneven. The letter remained clutched tightly in her hand. Margaret opened the door quietly. Adrian stood near the fireplace, still dressed despite the late hour. He looked exhausted, shadows dark beneath his eyes as though sleep had abandoned him long ago. The moment he saw Elena's face, concern crossed his expression immediately. What happened? She couldn't speak. Her throat burned too badly. Adrian stepped closer slowly. Elena? Without a word, she handed him the letter. Confusion flickered across his features as he unfolded it carefully. Then he saw the handwriting. Everything in him stopped. Elena watched the exact moment the color drained from his face. His hands trembled slightly as his eyes moved across the page. Silence swallowed the room. A terrible, devastating silence. Then Adrian reached the line. I named her Elena. His breathing broke. Not dramatically, quietly, like something inside him had just shattered beyond repair. He lowered the letter slowly, staring at Elena as though seeing her for the first time. The resemblance suddenly became undeniable now. The eyes, the smile, even the way she stood. Pieces of Isabel lived inside her. Oh my God, he whispered hoarsely. Elena's tears spilled freely now. She never told me. Adrian looked completely undone. Decades of grief, loss, rage, and longing crashed visibly across his face all at once. She was alive, he said weakly, almost to himself. All these years, she was alive. Pain twisted through Elena's chest. She died 8 months ago. The words hit him like a physical blow. Adrian turned away abruptly, one hand covering his mouth as he struggled to breathe steadily. For the first time since meeting him, the powerful billionaire disappeared completely. Only a broken man remained. She kept you from me, he whispered. No, Elena said softly through tears. She protected me. Adrian closed his eyes tightly. Deep down, he knew she was right. The room fell into heavy silence again. Then suddenly, a loud crash echoed somewhere downstairs. Both of them looked up instantly. Another sound followed. Voices, shouting, and then Margaret's terrified scream tore through the estate. Adrian moved before Elena could even react. The letter slipped from his hand onto the floor as he rushed toward the study doors. His entire expression transformed in an instant. The grief that had shattered him moments earlier vanished beneath something colder, protective, dangerous. Elena. Stay behind me, he ordered sharply. Her pulse thundered as another crash echoed through the estate below, followed by raised voices and hurried footsteps. Somewhere downstairs, glass shattered violently. Fear spread through her chest. Adrian threw open the study doors and strode into the hallway just as 2 security guards appeared from the far staircase. Speaking urgently into radios. What happened? Adrian demanded. One of them looked pale. Sir, someone breached the east gate. Elena's stomach dropped. Who? We don't know yet, but Adrian already seemed to. His jaw tightened with terrifying. Calm. Victor, he said quietly. Another scream echoed. Downstairs, Adrian immediately grabbed Elena's wrist and pulled her with him through the corridor. Come with me. They moved quickly through the massive estate while alarms suddenly erupted somewhere in the distance. Red security lights flashed across the marble walls. Elena's breathing became uneven. What's happening? Adrian didn't answer immediately, which frightened her more. They reached the main staircase just as Margaret appeared below, visibly shaken. Mr. Vale, take Elena to the west wing, Adrian interrupted firmly. No. Elena pulled slightly free from his grip. I'm not hiding while nobody tells me the truth anymore. Adrian looked at her, really looked at her, and for a brief second, she saw conflict inside his eyes. Then heavy footsteps echoed from the entrance hall, slow, deliberate. Victor Hale stepped into view. Rainwater darkened his expensive coat, but unlike the chaos surrounding the estate, he looked perfectly composed, almost amused. Behind him stood two armed men Elena didn't recognize. The entire hallway froze. Well, Victor said calmly, glancing between Adrian and Elena, this became messy faster than I expected. Adrian's voice turned lethal. You broke into my home. Victor gave a faint shrug. Technically, half this company still belongs to me. Elena felt Adrian step slightly in front of her instinctively, protecting her. Victor noticed and smiled coldly. There it is, he murmured. The famous Adrian Vale finally caring about something more than business. You threatened Isabel, Adrian said quietly. Victor's expression didn't change. You destroyed her. Life? Still nothing. Then Adrian's voice hardened further. And you knew about Elena. That made Victor pause. Only for a second, but it was enough. The silence that followed felt explosive. Elena's heartbeat pounded violently in her ears. You knew? She whispered. Victor looked at her almost pityingly. Of course I knew. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Adrian's fists clenched. Victor sighed as though discussing something mildly inconvenient. Your mother discovered financial records she was never supposed to see. Illegal transfers, bribes, names connected to people powerful enough to erase entire lives. His eyes drifted toward Adrian. I warned Isabel to stay quiet. You hunted her, Adrian growled. I protected this company. You destroyed my family. Victor's expression finally sharpened. No, he snapped coldly. You did that yourself the moment you built an empire with men you didn't fully trust. The accusation hit harder because part of it was true. Elena saw it in Adrian's face instantly. Years ago, before the wealth and headlines, Adrian had partnered with ambitious men like Victor to survive, and Isabel paid the price. Victor's gaze shifted back toward Elena now. She spent 26 years running because of what she knew. His tone softened mockingly. You should ask yourself whether she thought the truth about your father was worth dying for. Stop, Adrian warned dangerously, but Victor ignored him. She loved him enough to disappear, he continued. That's tragic, isn't it? Elena's chest burned with anger now. You ruined her life, she whispered. Victor tilted his head slightly. No, Elena. Your mother ruined her own life by refusing to understand how the world actually works. Adrian moved so fast, Elena barely saw it. He slammed Victor against the wall with brutal force, rage exploding across years of grief and guilt. You will never say her name again. Security guards rushed forward instantly, but Victor raised a hand calmly, stopping them. Oddly, he began laughing low.